Radio from Garrow.
Welcome to another Tin Dog podcast. This time it's a Podcast Alliance interview special. Over the next few weeks, you'll be able to hear some interviews carried out at this year's 2015's Whooverville convention. So once again, thanks to Steve Hatcher for organising Whooverville.
So, Jean and Tim, who's currently hiding all the way over there.
It's his podcast, he better get down.
I know. Will you please welcome Mr. David Benson and himself.
Thank you. Hello.
Mr. Nicholas Pegg, some of you may know him for the double act. And he finishes Stock Washplug. And, of course, Mr. Richard Marson. Tim's going to come running down now. And good luck.
Thanks.
You
sat in the right place. I'm hiding because I only got told I was doing this about 10 minutes ago, so I've been Googling you like mad.
Oh, have you?
I hope it didn't hurt.
Do you know, I thought I felt a strange tingle. That was me being Googled.
Never Google yourself. It's never going to end well.
Yes, they warn you about that at Catholic school,
Yes,
don't they?
They do, yeah. They tell children now as well, I think. Don't go online, don't Google your own name. Because the kids find out family secrets, you see that way.
Yes. Oh, are we? We're rolling up here. Go! And action. Do you want to take the lead, Tim? As this is your podcast and I'm here for moral support, as they say.
It's mine.
It's yours, all yours.
Well, we'll start at the end then. David, unfortunately, I've never made it up to the Edinburgh Festival. And I hear you had a highly successful show this year.
Am I talking into a microphone?
You're talking into this microphone or that microphone.
Do you need it to be...
Whichever one's
Fine.
hopefully some of them are.
So, yes, sorry, go on.
Yeah, you had a very successful show at Edinburgh this year, which did prompt a question in my mind. Because, like a lot of people in comedy, I'm guessing you're not really on the blue side of politics.
No.
So, the question
On the blue
is,
side of comedy, but not politics. No, you mean conservative.
Yeah.
I come from a long line of socialists, really. My grandfather, who was a headmaster in Dudley in the West Midlands, at the Wren's Nest School all his life, and he was a real pillar of the community, but he was also a Labour Party member and supporter and campaigned for the Labour Party. And, you know, sort of, they were posh, kind of middle-class Labour Party supporters in those days. Old-fashioned socialists and Fabians and what have you, and he was one of them, and that's the line I come from, free-thinking, Republican atheists, really. And so, you know, I went to school in Birmingham, in Castle Bromwich, just went to a comprehensive school, you know, and I didn't really fit in because, well, God, I could give the whole life story here, but, you know, the main, I think the key thing that happened to me as a child at school, starting school and saying prayers, you know, you put your hands together and say prayers to Jesus, you know. And we didn't have Jesus or God in our house. I didn't know what they were talking about. I remember I went home to my dad and said, we have to say prayers. And he said, oh, it's a lot of rubbish, no such thing, just pretend. I thought, okay, so this is the way the world works. Daddy at home tells you one thing about the world and how it works and what the truth is. And at school, they tell you something completely different, which he says is a lie. And yet all my friends are buying it. And they're all believing it. So, and also, why are these authority figures telling us these lies every day? And that really set up my relationship to authority in the world ever since. I don't believe any of them. But I do, I'm going to have to change. My MP at home in London is far too right-wing for me. And it's no good, you know. Jeremy Corbyn, he's too far. You know, no, he is actually my MP. And he's
almost
brilliant.
Prompting
MP.
my next question.
He's a brilliant MP.
We have to talk politics. What's your view on the current state of the Labour Party? Will they turn the ship around in the next 5 years? Well, I think,
you know, since we're at a science fiction convention, it's rather appropriate. Because it is as if they were overtaken by aliens You're right.
Yeah, I'll just see if I can get Tim to bring it back to a Doctor Who convention.
Well, it's up to you. We'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. But it's like the Labour Party was taken over by aliens in the 90s, and now looks sort of, on the surface looks like it is, and yet it's this kind of other things writhing away underneath the skin. And that's, I think, what Corbyn is now the only one left who's a real Labour Party member. Yes. And so he's got to have, even if he gets elected, he's going to have a massive job in order to bring over all these people who have become neoconservatives. They've been infected by that alien virus. Which is an alien virus, because we're not naturally neoconservative in this country, I don't think. And so I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens there. And I wish him luck, Mr. Corbyn. I think he's amazing to take on. He's the only one who's not allied to industry, business, corporations. He's representing us, the people, and that's why I like him.
I've had a slightly laid-back, stepped-away attitude to it, because I have friends not that far away from me, but in London, who are like very staunch Labour supporters, members of the party. People ring me up and tell me who I should be voting for in this, and so on and so forth, and I'm interested in politics, more interested than some people I know, but I've never got as far as joining a party or getting
I wouldn't join a party ever. I'm far too individualistic. I don't like the idea of joining a group that you then have to agree or pretend to agree with everybody else.
This is the problem they're having at the moment. Some people are trying to join to vote and they say, oh, no, you don't agree with us.
I think it's a huge game, isn't it? And do you want to talk about this? We can talk about this. I like talking about this, but I don't want to hijack it. But Boris, the thing was, you asked me about Edinburgh. You asked me about Edinburgh, and of course I was playing Boris Johnson. So that was a very odd one, and one that I didn't expect to be doing, but it was, I know. And
what do they call him, Bojo?
Yeah.
Let's not have any names of affection.
Bojo.
I don't think it's a name of affection, is it?
He doesn't use his initials, like some people do. It might get him the wrong kind of offers. But but a fascinating character to play. Politically, I'm not sure if he really... I mean, he's totally old-school Tory, isn't he? And he doesn't really represent us, but everybody likes him, and they feel that they would like to have a drink with Boris, and he would be fun to go out with, whatever.
You've touched upon him what I think is the biggest problem with him, that everybody has a view on him of the have I got news for you persona. And he's this bumbling man who has purposefully untidy hair, and it's as if they don't even listen to what he says the rest of the time.
Everybody's transfixed by his hair, and I think if he got alopecia, his political career would be over. Because it's all about this, and he's constantly doing this with his hair, and he won't go into a studio, into a TV studio until he's done that for 15 minutes in a mirror and got it exactly the way he wants it.
I used to do that all the time.
Did you?
It's all part of the look and image, isn't it, for him?
It is, but it works, you see, and he's done what Quentin Crisp used to say people should do. And I don't know if any of you know Quentin's wonderful one-man show that he did for many, many years, and he talked about how you should take that which makes you like yourself, rather than whether it's good or bad in other people's eyes, and make it, and use that to present yourself to the world, warts and all, and say, here I am. And, in other words, get what the joke is before they do, and present that to the world. And he's done that brilliantly, and it's worked. And he might well be the next Prime Minister.
Yeah, that's the worrying thing.
But it will always be entertaining. At least he's not just a drone. He is at least. He might send in.
Change subject.
Yeah, let's talk about.
I'm sat next to someone who worked in one of those buildings that I've idolised for years.
What television centre?
I love this T-shirt, by the way.
Yeah, a little bit of theme.
I sadly only managed to get into the place a couple of times. Once was for a recording of Pointless. I have been on screen. That was me clapping at one point. And the other time was, and it almost never happened, I was on one of the very last guided tours. I'd been over to the States for the Gallifrey convention. I'd just landed, and within about hours of me landing, I got a message online from a friend who I'd been kind of like circulating for months, because he was, I'm going to go in the last few months. And if you get any tickets, just get in contact with me. And so I got this message on the internet, and it was, you still interested? The jet lag on that side of the Atlantic is nothing to the jet lag on this side of the Atlantic. And so I'm I'm like, yeah, because it's like about a month before it'll just shut down and building sign.
Yeah, what did they show you? There was nothing happening then, was there?
Yeah,
they used to do that really annoying thing where they put you in the donut in the middle because of the echo, and they get everyone to clap. And if you were in one of the offices, that happened about 8 times a day, and you'd
they had a thing that where, frustratingly, you were on your own like I was. You end up having to hand your beloved camera over to some a BBC employee to have your photograph taken. And
so you got a rubbish
You
photo.
can't operate Zoom on my camera, can you? And so there's a photograph of me, a bad one, in what was the Sports Night studio. There's a photograph of me, a bad one, in the Oval. They'll show you the weather studio, or they show you near the weather studio, because you walk down a corridor and there's a monitor, and you go, through that door is, or through that door was Bill Giles, or whatever. And they take you into a tiny little room at one point and make you all do a quiz, which is a bit odd. It's a slightly sort of weakest link kind of thing. And the room itself is actually, in a way, almost more interesting than the quiz, because it's dotted with various awards the BBC have won over the years, and odd one or two costumes and things. And I was sat there sort of semi-watching the quiz, but going, that's actual laughter over there. And, yeah, I mean, they took us through some room that at one point was clearly a storage space for bits of set. And so I see some huge column and I point at the person, was that used on Strictly? Was that used on Strictly? I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder, they charge you for the exciting experience.
It was about £15 or something.
Wow. God, dear me.
We got to go into the ex-Blue Peter studio. That was probably the most interesting thing, because it was an actual proper set that had been seen on screen and everyone was wandering around going...
Was that the one with the sails?
Possibly, yeah. It was whatever the last one was in London, because they sort of rejigged it when they went up to Manchester.
Well, after I left, they took £2 million out of the budget, and so the show had to go, when you and I were doing it, it was in big studios.
Yes.
And then they decided that it was only for children, so they could have TC2
So they have
in smaller studio.
TC2 was tiny.
So it was put into this tiny studio. I'm very happy to say I never had to work in that studio, because the idea of having mass marching bands and Daleks and all the rest of it, you can't really do that in TC2.
Because Richard and I had the pleasure of working on Blue Peter together. I mean, Richard, of course, was in head honcho of Blue Peter for several years, weren't you?
I was, yes. I was Biddy Baxter in drag.
How interesting. I want to hear all about that.
But during, this coincided with the comeback of Doctor Who, and I was kind of in there as a Dalek operator from the first,
I said you were like our fifth presenter, because the Dalek was on so often.
That's very kind of you. I have to say, some of my happiest early memories of that period of working on Doctor Who are tied up with going on Richard's editions of Blue Peter, because there were several and they were often live. So we'd rehearse them in the afternoon and go out live, and there's nothing like. I've done other live things before, but it's the only time I've ever done a Dalek live on on TV. I've done live stage and whatever things, but
and we knew you wouldn't swear. We had Cardiff. Russell phoned me up and said, if you're going to do live Daleks, please promise me that you'll book the right people. The people who are not going to go off script and do it. I said that wouldn't work for us either.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Of course, I was swearing like a trooper inside. You couldn't hear. No, of course I wasn't. But now I remember. I mean. Unlike when we're actually making the show, making Doctor Who, they never give us headsets there. They just shout. They say, "Can you hear me? I want you to go over there." But on Blue Peter, because it was live and because it was, it was a very good idea actually, and I wish it happened in Cardiff. But anyway, I was given a headset because so that the director, in the heat of the moment, if I'd accidentally gone an inch too far over there or whatever, could say, "Nick, I just need you to go over." But that meant I could hear all the playback from the gallery during rehearsals in the afternoon. And I was just reminiscing about this to Richard just now outside, and. I do remember the day that David Tennant first wandered into onto the studio floor, because he was coming to do the results of this Designer Monster competition, and that's what we had the Dalek on for as well. And this was before. Was it before? No, he'd been seen already on the Regeneration.
He'd only regenerated. We hadn't actually seen it.
It was before his first
summer of
episode. Exactly. And but so and he of course was known, but he wasn't hugely famous yet, and he wandered on. And I do remember a female voice coming through as David, someone up in the gallery, one of your colleagues saying, "Oh, he's a bit of all right." And I thought, here comes a star.
I do remember he was so terrifically charming.
Yeah.
We'd had all the doctors since the show's come back. Chris Eccleston, was lovely, but he was very intense and took it very seriously and asked all sorts of questions about every aspect of the show.
Yeah.
And I as soon as I met him, I thought, well, he's not going to want to sit on the world's largest whoopee cushion, which was an item in that day's show.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have said Chris was a whoopee cushion.
I sidled up to the producer and said, let's do that next week, and we'll find something else for Chris to do. But he did a TARDIS bird feeder in the Blue Peter Garden.
Brilliant.
And he took it so seriously. He was like, so this can be made, so children are actually going to be able to make this, are they? And how and all of that. Whereas Tennant came in just absolutely charmed absolutely everybody, you know. So and Liz Sladen, she came in and was just she came in. The first thing she said when she looked at the studio was, this is where we used to Doctor Who. She's like, I'm having all these kind of flashbacks, and you know. And then she saw Kanan and the face fell.
Oh.
But no, they were wonderful. They were very happy memories. Those shows.
Yeah, great days.
And it was such a privilege because we knew Russell came to see us on Blue Peter the year before the show was back on air, and he said, I want Blue Peter to kind of back this and really kind of own it.
Yeah.
And so that's where that competition came from. But it was also, I said, well, in return, will you give us access to, you know, doctors, companions? I said, because if you're happy to do that, we'll back it all the way. And so it became, you know, the number of kids that entered that competition in an internet age to get 47,000 kids sending in design.
It's amazing, absolutely amazing. I remember that because the studio on the day the one was with the result, you had them kind of hanging in banners everywhere, hanging from, which was a nightmare for me, by the way, because I had to glide through and knock any of them.
We had to judge that at Russell's. He was so busy. We went, me and the presenter Gethin, who of course they all adored in Cardiff because he was Welsh and very good looking. And Gethin stupidly said on the journey up to Russell's house, he said, do you know, he said, I'm quite claustrophobic. And so I thought, okay, you
get him in one.
He became a Cyberman.
Right.
And so,
he did it. I remember Barnaby sort of did some Dalek with him. That was later on, I think.
That was with Matt.
Yeah. Oh, it was a bit later on. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I don't think that went so well. I think that's, you know, Daleks, as you are here to testify, are a very special art. Putting a Blue Peter presenter in there where enthusiasm is 90% of it and 10% of it skill, you know, that didn't go so well.
Yeah. I don't know if Gethin's bit of Dalek ever actually ended up on screen.
Probably not.
I think it was sort of claimed that he did, but
it's in the Blue Peter
right,
annual.
okay, I'm not sure.
So it did happen.
Yeah, I know, I remember it happening.
Children.
Oh, no, of course not. The other thing I remember about another thing I remember about doing a live Blue Peter was, I forget which one it was, which particular edition, but there was one time when I came in to do the Dalek thing, and you had McFly were on the same edition, and they were huge at the time. McFly with the bee's knees, you know, and anyway, so I came to reception and checked in, and they said, "Oh yes, come this way." And whoever it was who was walking me down the corridor, you know, said, "We're a bit short of dressing rooms at the moment, so I'm afraid you're going to have to share with McFly." So, as my proud boast that I shared a dressing room with McFly, I never actually met them because they were in the studio doing their thing while I was. So I was shown into this slightly messy, but you know, a dressing room that they'd already had their sandwiches and there were bits of, you know, some of their coats or whatever were lying around, and I had to, you know, sit in there for a bit and get myself ready for the thing. But then by the time
of hot desking.
It was hot desking, exactly, that's right. Yeah. And then I was called to the studio and they presumably came back. Never the twain did meet, but at least I got to boast to my sister that I'd shared a dressing room with McFly.
My favourite memory of that Doctor Who time on Blue Peter was getting a phone call saying that the actor we'd hired to play an Auton in a pre-title sequence we were recording in the morning had a complete freak out and what were we going to do? And I said, I'll play him. And I went down to the studio. This was a complete self-indulgence because I thought everyone wants to be a Doctor Who monster. And this was all right. And they said, well, the suit won't fit. I said, I'll wear my own suit. Fine. Brings his own suit. Went down there. Of course, when they put the mask on, I thought, oh God, I don't think I can do this. Because it was a tiny little hole. But I thought, I can't. Pride demands that I see this through. Having been big-headed enough to say, you don't need anyone else, I'll do it. And I went down. Of course, it took about 2 hours to do this thing. And it gave me so much respect for people who spend a lot of time cramped into those costumes and skins. And
absolutely.
And every time I see them, I have that thought. I think that is so hard to do.
Yeah. I mean, we have our various trials and tribulations doing the Daleks, but at least in a Dalek, you're not pressed up against it the whole time. You know, you've got a little.
Do you take anything in there with you?
Bottle of gin and I've got an optic actually in there, and I just sort of, you know, no, I wish. No, not really. We do sometimes have. a fan. I don't mean like one of you guys. I mean,
there's room for
Shades of John Nathan Turner.
And no, not one of those. There wouldn't be room. And maybe a little bottle of water. But the trouble is that there's very few places to put anything down. You've got a seat, or to call it a seat is actually to dignify it. It's a plank. But if you put your bottle of water down sort of just there, you're always in danger of it falling off. And once it falls on the floor, because certainly the bronze ones, which are the ones we're usually in, they're so cramped inside that you actually can't physically, there isn't room with your shoulders and everything to reach down and touch the floor. You just can't. So if you drop something on the floor, and this has happened before, I was in there once stupidly with my, since iPhones have come along, they've been an absolute godsend for us Daleks, because we just text each other all the way in the studio going, God, this is going on a bit, isn't it? Because we are in there for quite a long time sometimes. So we're doing that, and for some idiotic reason I was using one of those styluses, that you get instead of because I do slightly prefer those, the finger. So I was doing that, and I dropped the bloody thing on the floor, and I couldn't reach it, and we were just in between, they were changing the lights or something, and we were just about to go for a take, and I could see it on the floor right next to the wheel, and my first bit of action was to swing my Dalek around, and I thought my front wheel is just going to go boom over that and ruin the take, and there's nothing I can do. And eventually, just very shamefaced, I had to call over the first AD who happened to be walking past. I said to whoever it was, I forget which episode it was that this happened on, but I said, "Excuse me, sorry, look, I'm really sorry, but I've dropped a thing. Can I just kick it out for you to catch because I can't reach it?" And he was, "What are you talking about?" I said, "No, honestly, and I just had to boot it out, and this thing just skittered across the studio floor. It was so humiliating. What an idiot." Anyway, I learned my lesson. I just use fingers now.
I just want to quickly say, I think one of the great joys of Blue Peter, the magazine format, is because you can go from McFly to a Dalek to a bird feeder. And I know, David, your fabulous show that I saw back in the day, the Kenneth Williams show, he did Blue Peter a couple of times.
Did he?
Yes, he did, to promote Willow the Wiz. And he came on and he did a whole thing with Sarah Green, I think was the presenter. And happily in those days, Blue Peter presenters tended to be actors, which of course would go better
Peter Purvis,
But I just think how fabulous to get him in to do that. And I'd love to read the diary entry about those.
I wonder if there is one. I don't think there is one where he mentions that. But they used to have, Arthur Lowe and John Namesh to do a bit of Dad's Army or whatever on. They would have performers. I loved it when I grew up. I never missed Blue Peter back in the day, in my day,
Yes.
But I found it extremely homoerotic.
What program?
Yeah.
What, Blue Peter?
Oh, yes.
Well, as we said, there is an outtake on one of the end of series tapes.
I want it. Can I get it?
With John Barrowman helping Gethin to make a TARDIS. And John manages to turn anything innocuous into... He said, so you have to force the ring down your central column, and then you have to find the plunger, and you have to manipulate it. And so Gethin, who was trying to keep the... Luckily, it wasn't live. But the outtakes from this, and we showed that to David Tennant the next time he came in, and he said, it's gay hell.
John Barrowman is unstoppable like that. He's just... I remember when we were doing the Bad Wolf Parking of the Ways story, which he was in, of course, there's a scene in that where he has to get naked. The thing with Trini and Susanna robots, and they kind of make his clothes disappear, that bit. And for the shooting of that particular bit, it was decided it was going to be a closed set. That's when, basically it means no one who doesn't have to be there can hang around. Because normally, people just hang around, come in and out, get a cup of tea and watch a bit if they want to, if they're bored sitting in their trailers. And then for that bit, they just said, right, look, John's got to get naked, so obviously camera crew need to be here, but everyone else, which is fine, So we'd just been told this, and then John appeared from his trailer and came in through the studio door, wearing a bathrobe, and obviously sort of bare legs underneath, and he was obviously getting ready to do the thing. And he said, "Now, it's a closed set for this." And we said, "Yeah, no, don't worry, John. We're just going off to get a cup of tea." And he was, if he was there, right, double the length of this, and the studio was over there somewhere, and this was a huge space full of people, far more people than there are here now. And he just went, "Close set, everybody," and then he just dropped his bathrobe there and just walked stark naked through. "Close set, I don't want anyone looking. It's a close set."
If you've got it, flaunt it.
He's absolutely incorrigible.
Years before Doctor
I've never met him. I'd love to.
Years before, I directed John in a children's series called The Movie Game, which he presented. And he was a very young presenter at the time, and he's lovely to work with and great fun. But the producer was a very old-school BBC producer who wouldn't accept that John might be, as they used to say, a bachelor. So he used to say, John, is he really not the marrying kind? And I said, Chris, don't worry about it. John said to me, look, let's have some fun. He said, every week, we do a game where I get to dress up as a kind of iconic gay image. So one week a Mountie, 1 week a New York cop, 1 week, and that's what we did. And we managed to get through 13 episodes, and they got more and more ridiculous and outrageous, you know. And I mean, John was just in his element, and yeah, it worked for the kids too.
Yeah,
it was all good fun.
Yeah.
But the producer never clocked it. He's got a nice girlfriend somewhere.
Well, in the Five-ish Doctors, he's got a wife and kids.
Well, exactly.
Oh, that was such a great gag, wasn't it? Don't tell anyone.
It was a gag. I thought that show was a documentary. But, no, you were responsible for the excellent documentary around the time that TV Centre tragically shut down. And there was a lot of excitement around that, and it was 90 minutes long.
Yes, it was amazing.
So the obvious question is, what ended up on the cutting room floor, even with a 90-minute running time?
The big problem with that documentary was that everybody said yes. Usually when you're putting a documentary together, people are a bit, and how much are you paying and all the rest of it, and we weren't paying anything. Everybody wanted to do it, including David Frost, who at that point was very ill, and it was really poignant. He said, please can we do it in the studio that we used to do? That was the week that was in. And he came in and he sort of summoned up and he did his hello, good evening and welcome. And it was just, you know, so many of those moments where the hair on the back of your neck would stand up, because all these people were taking part in a love letter to a place that had meant so much, not just to them, but to those audiences. And I think it was almost at the last gasp of, they gave us 90 minutes, we had minimal interference. The only thing was I didn't want a commentary, because so many modern documentaries that use archive clips are ruined for me by a smart-ass voice going, oh, look, they're wearing flares, ha, ha, ha. And I can't stand that.
Yeah.
So I said, I want the narrative to be driven by the people in the show. Now, to do that, you have to be able to interview over a long period of time so that you can go to people and say, so-and-so said this, so that when you cut it, it looks as though they're all reacting to each other's stories.
Yep.
And we managed to do that, and that, to me, I was so proud of that. And, you know, even though when you work on a programme, you live in an edit suite for weeks and weeks and weeks, I still cried at the end of it every time, and I thought, that's the acid test, that you still can be moved by something, not my thing, but their thing, and the way they articulated it. So, yeah, it was a wonderful privilege to do that.
It was a terrific show, though. I mean, I haven't said anything to you about that. It was a wonderful show. I thought it was brilliant. And I totally agree with you. I love that style of documentary, that if you can dispense with a narrator altogether and just have it, as you say, but it takes a lot more preparation, doesn't it?
The awful thing now is that, I'm doing lots of shows, and most of the shows I do are factual and require voiceover, and very often the first thing a commissioner will say to you is, oh, get a comedian in, pay a writer to come up with some funnies. It's the come dine with me school.
Yeah.
And it kind of works for come dine with me, but I just think it's so patronising to people. They don't need that.
Yeah. And music all the time.
And
endless music.
Plonky music.
You can't have a documentary like you did in the old days where there was just somebody talking. There has to be music all the way. Where did this come from?
It's also fear. There is so much fear. When you sit in a cutting room now, you don't sit there with just, you know, an executive producer or so. You have someone from a channel, you have someone from a brand sometimes, you have someone, and all of these people feel they have to justify their existence. So therefore they will find something usually daft to say. My favourite recent example was someone from a major television company who said, whose note was, guys, I've come up with what, you know, shoot me down in flames if you think this is stupid, but where I'm coming from, I've been thinking about how, could we possibly cut the show so it runs backwards? So you cut the end first and then go backwards? Because no one's really done that, and that would be really brave, and I said, that would be stupid.
There's a reason why nobody's ever done it.
But I'm afraid the reason why I've not been a lot more successful is that I don't have the political ability to unroll my tongue and say, that's so wonderful, and blah, blah. I just think, get a grip.
No.
You know.
So when you watch W1A, is it a documentary?
It's a documentary,
I
have worked for the head of Better. No, I don't want that. No, that's wrong. You know, I know that lady. There's a lady who works in television who's... no, I can't tell you that. That's slightly too rude. But she's very, very high up. And recently some friends of mine were doing a documentary about dementia, which is an extremely serious subject. And they are absolute experts in their field of programme making. And they'd set it up, worked on it for a year and a half, and they went into her with the first cut of the first programme, and her note was, well, it's not very funny, is it? Can we find a few laughs? And then she said, it's got a lot of old people in it. Can't we make it a bit sexier for a few younger people?
It's just that everything is wrong with modern culture, really, isn't
so
it?
I said they should go back and pitch a show called Glamentia, which was about the glamorous aspects of it. Because, I mean, where do you go with that? They came back and they said, what were we supposed to say? This is the woman who was paying the bill for it.
Yeah.
In the end, they didn't show one of the programmes because the channel decided it was too depressing. I mean, you know...
Good Lord. It's just quite strange.
That's shocking.
It is full of people who, like in W1A, there are people in offices who just sort of cover their backs and go, oh yes, no, yes, very strong, oh yes.
I worked for someone at the BBC who had a title, Head of Interactivity Change Management, which was a sort of 2 jobs in one. That was a 6-figure salary. So I adore the BBC, I'm passionate about it, but I sometimes think their self-inflicted wounds are so painful when you care about it and you think, why are you doing... And we were talking earlier about how the NHS, teaching, government, all of these major institutions share common problems. And a lot of it is to do with the importing, I'm afraid, from the States of this kind of management culture, which says a lot about nothing at all.
Yeah.
And it's really sad. And going back to what you were
It's
saying...
all about having lunches. Isn't it?
Oh, and just spinning,
making themselves look busy.
And
let's pretend we're busy.
Uncomfortable, they're like, oh, that's a bit
There's a show in this.
And, you know,
There's a show attacking these people. We must do it.
but you need to find a person who will commission it.
Yeah, that's what
No, you don't do it yourself.
That's the advantage of stage. You've got editorial
Well, I was going to say,
haven't you?
you know, this is off the tack, but you know, one of the great things about being a fringe performer, and as the last show I did before Boris was 5 years ago, was about the Lockerbie bombing, and I was playing Jim Swire, whose daughter was killed. I named names of terrorists who actually are in the frame as the ones who did it. I named the ministers who blocked continually the truth coming out and said what they'd said and made the audience go, got them angry. And I thought, you couldn't do this probably at the National Theatre or the BBC because there's all these layers of filters,
and there are people who invest in the shows who now feel they have a right to have... Well, we don't want to offend them because we'll lose the sponsorship.
Quite. The fringe show, you get up and you bloody well say what you want to say. And let them try and stop you.
In the past
and you
few
could still
days-
make the front page of the papers, as we did.
The news in the past few days astonishes me because I put it on at 6 o'clock at night and they go on about the whole... And I don't even know what word is politically correct now. Migrant,
refugee.
Immigrant, refugee. Let's just say refugee crisis. And the main headline on the 6 o'clock news was the other night was, this young child has been washed up on this beach, and the pictures are too tragic to show you. Hours later, you have the newspaper reviews on Sky News and on the BBC News Channel. There is the picture that, we can't show it to you. But here it is on the newspaper.
So the papers could have suppressed the images as well, but they decided to use them as a motive.
Social media will never, and you can't control social media. I saw that image on Twitter, after all of those reports. I didn't want to see the image, and I have real issues, particularly with the follow-up, with the fact that the father has been, stuck on news coverage all over the world, and he's a man in an intense grip of grief. And that is not something, for whatever reason, that should be, big close-up on news coverage.
That's so right.
I find it repulsive.
Right. Yes.
It's the
problem is people are
desire of
trying to use that
24-hour
as
news,
if it's going to
isn't
make
it?
a difference, and it won't. Because it's in the same vein as the whole gun debate in the States. Whenever that gets really bad...
Well, it's
someone will stand up and say, yes, we'll make a change now.
There's a prurience about it. I mean, I suppose you can form an argument to say that the images of that child kick-started a kind of intense reaction on a human level to something that's very easy to hide behind the statistics.
Yes,
say these are other people there, which we do, and I get that. But I think it's the layer of the follow-on.
Sorry, I'm being gesticulated. I know I'm due to be doing a panel. Do you want me to... Come up. It's lovely to talk to everyone. I shall leave you with that. I've got to go and do my panel. It's lovely to talk to you all.
Should we carry on? Are we finished, or should we just go on? Hello.
I had a couple of questions, actually.
Go ahead.
One, David, great to see you here.
Thank you. Let me just move over here.
Will you be returning as Panda?
Panda.
Because, I think the most recent box set of Paris.
Yeah.
Which is, I can't remember the guy's name.
I can't either.
Well, the guy's name. He plays,
Captain Donovan, I don't remember.
But yeah, will he be returning as Panda?
Well-
and how did you get the gig as him? Because
As Panda?
You and Katie work so well together.
Yeah. What's your name, sorry?
It's Liam.
Liam. Well, the gig came about, just as so often they do. I think somebody dropped out. And some of the best work I've ever done has been filling in for someone who's dropped out. And may they continue to drop out. In fact, Boris Johnson thing was only because they didn't have anybody else to do it. And actually, so Panda came about, and I read the script, and I thought, well, that sounds like Gerard Hoffnung to me. Do you know who knows Gerard Hoffnung? The great, he wasn't a comedian, he was an artist and just a personality of his day. He died aged 34. But had this delivery, sort of sounded like this old, kind of colonel or something, and which he wasn't at all. But I borrowed his delivery for Panda, and then you see we did those two, Liam. I don't know if you know those two early ones that we did back in the day, and that was the first time I'd met Katie, and I seem to remember that I was a bit down, a bit gloomy at the time, not really working much, and there she was, surrounded by all these acolytes, and everyone saying how marvellous she was, and she was doing her full Katie Manning act, which is based on the real person, as it were, but anyway, and I just thought, I can't be bothered, I'm a cow, whatever, and just so, anyway, we did the show, and then years later we were invited back to do more, and Then I completely just changed my opinion of her totally, and she's become a really, really good, supportive friend during times when this has been a struggle. I've learned this year or so, I've had virtually no work. I've been auditioning and not getting stuff, and you think, oh God, what am I doing? And then suddenly, bang, you get a job that gets you back in the flow again. And so she knows all about that, and she's a very experienced performer, and so she's been immensely supportive and kept me going, boosted my morale many times.
There was a guy on Desert Island Disc recently who won the Nobel Prize for his work into the nature of human happiness. He was asked a question about, what profession is the profession that gives you the greatest joy? And he said, this is the profession that gives you the greatest joy and yet also the worst misery. And that, of course, is acting and performing. He said people in the whether they're dancers, singers, actors, creative people, they will experience the highest highs and the very worst lows.
Well, that's the thing, and I think that's hard for people to understand. It's hard to get your head around yourself because, I had such a difficult year, just weeks and weeks and weeks of no work and no money and nobody wants me. And then, boom, this job comes up in Edinburgh, which wasn't a paid job, it was only expenses, but playing Boris Johnson. But then, suddenly, everyone's saying you're marvellous again, and you get these great reviews, and the houses are full, and then I found myself, meeting old Edinburgh chums like Nicholas Parsons, who's done a show on the Fringe for donkey's years, and always has me on as a guest because of the Kenneth Williams thing initially. And it always goes fantastically well. And Barry Cryer was up this year, who's another lovely hero who's become a friend, working with him, and I can hear muttering. It's like the whole room is alive with...
I think we've outstayed our work.
I think we've outstayed our work. Yeah, you can tell, can't you?
All right.
Liam, I think we have to stop that question there. But I hope they will ask me back at some point.
Yeah.
I do hope so, because I miss it.
And also, your
Go on.
role as Crowley in Scary
Yeah.
is brilliant.
Thank you. I'm glad you know that one.
I'd love to would have met the guy.
I think it was quite scary.
Interesting character.
Alistair Crowley, and I play him very camp. And sort of like that, he talks like that, oh, really. And that's how I read it. That's how he came off the page to me, and that's how I read it. And then I read a book about him, and they said he spoke in a very high-pitched camp voice, and I thought, well, I got that right. Good.
You obviously channeled him.
I must have done, yeah. But fabulous part to play, because you can't go over the top with that. Nothing like Kenneth or something.
We haven't got a pot of lard, but we'll have to say goodbye to Nicholas.
A pot of lard? Oh, yes,
have I got no news for you
reference? Roy
Hattersley. Yes, but
Nicholas
we'll have to say goodbye to Nicholas.
Well, I could just go on sitting here and talking on forever, couldn't you?
We'll have to find another
and
room
I want
for
to
you.
ask you more about this homoerotic BBC, the Blue Peter, because I remember John Noakes appearing in the nude. Peter Purvis was in the nude.
Yes, he used to wear very, very...
No, he didn't. He was in the nude. When I was 7 years old, he visited... There was an episode in black and white where John Noakes visited a sauna. And he had this little friend who took him round the sauna, and you saw them going in bare ass into the sauna, and the next day at school, it's all
I have
they
to
were
say,
talking
we
about.
did that with Matt Baker years later in a St. Petersburg sauna where he was beaten by the van driver with
Right.
all twigs.
Okay.
Because that's what you do when you go to Russia.
Of course.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I just remember these, and there was also Peter Shilton giving John
Yes.
Notes and
Yes.
Peter Purvis a training session where
Yes.
they ended up in the shower together, naked. And I'm
But
sorry.
that's not homoerotic, that's what
it was to me.
lads do.
It was to me. I mean, it's like Barbara Windsor having her bra pulled off in camping.
Yes.
Set off the hormones of
Well,
generations of
we
young
took
men.
one presenter to train with the Edinburgh rugby team.
Oh,
ended
God.
up with him in an ice. He ended
You're
up in
having
an ice
naughty
bath
thoughts.
with all these boys pouring ice cubes all over him.
Well,
and I
maybe.
did have to answer a few letters after that.
Did you show everything?
Yeah, well, not everything.
Well,
The
where will it all
And
end?
it will have to be the closing question.
Yes.
Is your next book called Blue Peter in capital letters?
I'm going to write a book about my next one-man show's going to be about Blue Peter, about the homoerotic.
Now,
lot
that
of
might drag me
material.
up to it. That sounds
I think
quite
Billy Baxter
interesting.
must have had a pretty good idea for what was
She
going
said
to wake the kids up, because she had them naked after all the time.
She kept in touch all those years later.
You ever saw Valerie Singleton naked, though?
Valerie wore clothes in bed.
She didn't
She
go
was
to
like
the
the
toilet
Queen.
or
She
nothing.
was like the Queen.
I know,
Yeah,
she was.
same,
Yeah,
yeah.
she was like, yeah. Well,
Thank
this-
you
all
very
this-
much, David.
We're going to take off if we do. Thank you and good night.
And
Thank you.
goodbye, David. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Here we go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
I like being more in support than I don't say anything.
You've been listening to the Doctor Who Tin Dog podcast. Available on RSS, iTunes, Audioboom, Tumblr, and wherever podcasts are found. Why not become a supporter of the show by visiting patreon.com/tindog. Doctor Who and its associated properties are copyright of the BBC and no infringement is intended. To contact the show, email tin-dog@hotmail.co.uk. The Tin Dog podcast is a founder member of the Doctor Who Podcast Alliance.